Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of At Home with Holmes. Thank you, Maddie, for those hand gestures. And for you, the audience, joining us here today, this evening, morning, night, wherever you are. And so, as you know, we are housekeepers. And so we have some housekeeping before we get into this episode.
If you want to know, because you all do and have been asking, the secret to our intellect and our handsome good looks, there are 3 things you have to do. 1, touch nature. 2, consume good product. 3, wear good product. And how you can do this and in this order, you start by going to Cabin on the Coulee, cotc.ca.
Where you can touch some grass.
Touch some grass, get into some nature. This is time to rejuvenate your soul. Our family does this once a year. It is rated #1 farm stay in Canada, according to TripAdvisor. And so go to cotc.ca, and this is where you can go to these central Alberta glam sites with your family.
Yeah, it is between May to November, and people are already booking vacations, so guys, make sure to book in advance. And if you go on that website, you'll see that you have the selection between the cabin, which holds 6 guests, 3 bedrooms, and 4 beds. You also have the Coulee Yurt, which holds 5 guests, 3 bedrooms, 3 beds. And then last but not least, the Grouse House, which holds 4 guests, 1 bedroom, and 2 beds. All of the photos are online, and the cabin and the Grouse House are pet-friendly. The Coulee Yurt is not. But again, go to cotc.ca to check those guys out, and then you can go to their Substack, Cabin on the Coulee Farm, to get updates on the family and the business and any updates. And if you scroll down, you'll see, oh, these 2 lovely people, or 3 lovely people. You'll see the owner of the business, Eric, interviewing me and Maddie when we were at Cornerstone. And if you hadn't noticed those beautiful garments that we are wearing,
you can buy a beautiful garment on our Buy Me a Coffee. This is step 2. You can buy us a matcha on the homepage, because that's how you be healthy. This is the second thing you need to do to get our intellect. And if on the far right, you can see shop. That's how you get the 3rd and final step, which is beautiful garments, the Alberta jerseys.
And what is it that Jordan Peterson says? He says you got to dress up like you actually care about yourself. Mm-hmm. And not only do we dress like we care about ourselves, but you and us, we all can dress like we care about our nation, which we do. I am not joking about that. I'm just having fun.
And you can buy more than one if you want to spread the love to family members. Good makes good gifts. When you buy it, it'll do a little pop-up message for you to send me your size so I know what to send you.
Yep. So again, if you want to achieve our lovely intellect and handsomeness, then check out Cabin on the Coulee Farm, buy me a coffee, aka matcha, and support us by shopping for a jersey and support Alberta that way. So thank you guys for listening to our little segment. And without further ado, we can get on with the episode.
Alrighty, hello everybody. This is a very exciting episode because not only you, but me and Macy are back in school. This is Serena, and Serena is a local Calgarian here that we met through our business of being involved. And she is a teacher. She is a teacher here in Calgary. And so we have the very big privilege of having her share some of the knowledge of social emotional learning. Other people have referred to it very vaguely as like SOGI, but it has much deeper roots that go far back. And considering that Serena is a teacher and brave enough to come and speak about this on our podcast, me and Macy are absolutely privileged, and we are super excited to be taught as if we were 9. So, Serena, is there anything you want to say before I pull up the presentation?
And also a little bit of what convicted you to try and
why
to speak out about this and even want to be on our podcast of all podcasts to give it to the people of Alberta, and Calgary.
Well, thank you for having me. First of all, I've been teaching for 20 years. I can't believe I can say that, but and I've taught in both Canada and the United States. And I've just, when you've been around for that long in any profession, you start seeing things change, words change, some things roll back. And when I got back to Canada and started seeing things with the social emotional learning, little spidey senses started coming up. And no one could really figure out what the issue was, but you had this feeling when you were seeing it or implementing it, there was just something in the pit of your stomach that just wasn't quite aligning. I am a Christian, and so there was just some things within that worldview that just wasn't seeming like it was aligning properly. And in addition to teaching my classes, I do get to teach professional development opportunities for teachers around the province. So as I've been doing more research, things kept kind of popping up. And then as I watch the news, I keep seeing things happen and I keep going, I know why that's happening. I know why that's happening. I know where this is coming from. And I think that's everyone's conversation. Like, how did we get here in education? How did we get here as a province? How did we get here as a world? Yesterday, I had someone say it to me, what's wrong with the kids right now? Like, we're watching the thing with some teenagers stabbed another kid in the city a week or so. I think there was 2 stabbings actually. And just what's happening. And I don't want to say this is the cause, but it really is the root and the path that has gotten us here. And I think it's going to answer a lot of questions maybe that people are wondering. And I'm hoping it empowers even some parents to ask questions. If anyone's watching who's involved in legislative stuff, to just start listening more to some of the words that are coming out, things we're really great in education with naming things. Like you and I just joked about alliteration. We're great on putting really catchy phrases to things and making them shiny and beautiful and going, this sounds really good. But then when you start peeling back the onion, it gets a little bit more worrisome. And when it's our kids that are on the line and our future politicians, like just think my grade 4 class could be a future prime minister or mayor, that it puts a lot of onus on educators and adults going, are we truly preparing? What have we prepared them for? And what are we exposing them to? So, and I am a Calgarian that goes back to 1884. My ancestors came out to Alberta. We were one of the founding families. Whoa. And so I feel I have a vested interest on the trajectory of our province and where we've seen things change and the conversations we've had as a family. And I just want to do my part to hopefully just open awareness to some things going on in our province, in our classrooms. So
I'm excited. This is especially
like the
cool.
Best intro ever.
I know, right? And it's always interesting for me and Macy because we got put through the regular school system, and I didn't realize because recently I went through some of my old schoolwork that I'd kept for probably sentimental reasons, and it's mind-blowing all the research that me and Macy have done after high school reflecting on what they taught us. I didn't think some of the SEL, social emotional learning, and some of the messages were there in my day, but they were. And that's really hectic because it just it solidifies the fact that they're really small messages that just sneak their way in and you don't see them coming because one, like you said, one definition change and you don't notice it, and then suddenly it means something different. So
it's like soft warfare.
Yes.
It is.
Hence sophistry, precisely. And as people that we want in our future, we want to homeschool our kids. Your battle, because you're in the public or the schooling system generally, that is very, it's very commendable because me and Macy obviously just want to homeschool to try and get our kids out of it. But there's so many kids still in it. And that's why this is very important.
And if I could say one thing for my profession, I think as being a Christian teacher, there's often this misnomer like all teachers are blue-haired crazy people that are advocating for all of this stuff that we don't agree with. There's a lot of good teachers out there in both public and private that don't agree with all of this, or in some cases being forced to teach the things that go against their own grain, their own beliefs, which is wrong in my opinion. They shouldn't be forced to teach that. But there's some really good teachers out there that are really trying to do the right thing. And I think we need to support those as many as we can. If you know good teachers out there, just let them know how much you love them and appreciate them and the work they're putting in and their ability to try to, in some cases, shelter their students from some of this as best they can in the environment they're in. So kudos to all of you out there.
And kudos to you for speaking out. So I'm really excited. Okay, so Maddie, how do you want to, are you going to screen share her presentation?
Yeah, I will screen share, and then Serena, you will direct me for where you want to go. I'll make sure this is zoomed in.
Just like, people. Next slide, please.
Right?
Okay. Well, why don't we start with slide 4?
Okay.
So this is sort of where things started to go for me. We've heard a lot of those little words and catchphrases coming out. We've heard CRT. We've heard words like gender inclusion. We've heard CSE. We've heard cultural competencies. They're all catchphrases in education vernacular. They're words that we are using. Not everyone, even everyone in the industry, didn't quite understand what all of these mean, but they kept coming up over and over and over. And I know you mentioned you like alliteration. I did another PD called Principalities, Powers, and Policies, in talking in talking about what we're actually fighting against, because it's not people. It is much bigger ideologies that are out there, and they start out as policy, and they get implemented first as guidelines, then they become legislation and law. And so that particular PD was directed towards administration as to what they need to be aware from and where these policies were coming from.
Copy that.
And so that got me on going down a very big bunny trail, but a very deep bunny trail. I mean, I followed Alice all the way down. So the definition I had here for SEL is simply it's transformation education repackaged. The focus on SEL is no longer academic, but rather indoctrination of specific attitudes and beliefs. And you require full acceptance to be accepted into whatever is being taught at that point. It's purposely evasive in the language. It's meant to sound good. In the States, though, there's actually been teachers that have been coming out against this. And so schools realized that, and they started repackaging and renaming some of it and going, oh, we're not doing SEL or social emotional learning. They're changing the names because people came onto it. And as we know, a rose by any other name will still smell as sweet. So just because you change the name doesn't change what it's made of. And even the fact that the education industry felt they had to tweak something or adjust or change the name to somehow let it slide under so no one would catch on to what they were doing just makes you wonder what are you hiding at that point that you feel you need to change the name because now we don't want you to think we're doing this anymore.
Amen.
So with under SEL, we have several concepts that fall underneath it. Some of which would be such as CRT and things like that. So I'm going to actually read something that I had here because this always becomes, this is, I think, the impetus of our entire culture right now is offense. And the reason I need to talk about being offended is because SEL is all about the emotional side and how we don't want to offend anyone.
Right.
And so we're implementing this into the classroom. So I've given the example in the past about, we often say we don't want to offend. And then again, as a Christian, it says the word of God offends. So it's like, how do we not offend these little ones, but then the word of God offends? So I've given an example. If I am on a diet and I'm doing all the correct things and I'm eating my salad and all of this good stuff and I'm trying to do the right thing, and then Maddie comes and sits next to me with this giant triple fudge, hot fudge sundae and starts eating it in front of me while I'm trying to make all these good choices,
right.
I could come out and go, I'm really offended right now. I'm trying to do the right thing. And you're like, I cannot not eat that now. How can you do this in front of me? Conversely, if you're the one scarfing down this triple chocolate sundae and I sit down and start eating my salad, and all of a sudden you're beginning to feel guilty of maybe what you're doing and realizing that, oh, maybe I should be eating healthier. Oh, maybe this isn't the best choice. Maybe this isn't the best health choice for me. You could say, I'm offended now. So how you're offended can come on what path you're on. And so correcting it can change. And so that's how the word of God can offend. Sometimes you're on the wrong path. Like if you're going the wrong road and you're going somewhere and you end up in the wrong place and you get a speed bump and it stops you, you're like, man, that was really rude. And then you look up and go, oh, I wasn't supposed to be on this road. That type of offense and stumbling blocks, okay. It's when we're on the right road and someone has pulled us off or yanked us off. So I think as a culture, we need to ask, what's causing the offense? Are we offending because someone's on the right road or someone's on the wrong path? And that's going to be up to each person to understand in their conversation. But if you're going to say, I'm offended by something you're saying, why are you offended? What path are you on that my words are offending you? And coming to that conversation with yourself. And I think that's an interesting kind of retrospective piece that we have there. Did that make sense?
Yeah, it's kind of like the truth hurts type, so to speak.
Then it feels like taking on more personal responsibility, as in you need to be navigating more introspectively as to why these things are offending you, or you are the one that is committing the offense.
Yeah, me and Macy, when we were trying to talk to some younger kids a couple of years ago, and we were talking about being offended, we were like, just so you know, offense is optional. It's a choice. So if you choose to be offended, ask yourself, is that a choice that actually helps you?
Exactly. I love the way you said that. So if you want to go to the next slide, I have a cute little, I can go to the next one. That's a good slide too. So I had started out 3 different PowerPoints that I did with PDs with this particular one, because I feel this is the reason we have problems with people just stepping up to have any conversation about anything. It's fear. And so if I just read a couple of these, but it immobilizes people. Just if you think of just if you're, I fell into Lake Kananaskis when I was 5, and I knew how to swim. I was scared the sharks were going to eat me. That was my concern. I did not realize there were no sharks in the Kananaskis Lake, but I was 5, right? And so fear literally froze me, and my stepdad had to run in and rescue me. So fear can just stop you from making the choices that you know you should do. I knew how to swim. I just couldn't do what I needed to know to do. That ends up making us feel powerless. So when we're put into conversations and our students are put into conversations, if we keep surrounding them in fear that what they have to say is wrong, they are not going to speak up when they need to speak up. And then it leaves us concerned about what people are going to say. People are going to call us some type of ism, that they're going to say we've done something wrong. And then it makes us doubt. And I think that's really what this comes from. They want us to doubt what we believe and not be able to stand up for truth. So we never need to have fear of speaking the truth if it's spoken in love and confidence and compassion and authority. The world can never really disagree with you. They may not agree with you, but they can't really successfully disagree with you if you just speak truth. And you may not necessarily agree with what I have to say, but you're going to have to listen to it at least, and then weigh it. So if you go to the next slide, these are some of the concerns that have popped up as SEL has come about. And if I was to sort of explain, SEL is social emotional learning. It is often called the curriculum to teach CRT, critical race theory, culturally responsive teaching, which I'll give an example of later. Any of the sexual ideologies, you mentioned SOGI. So it's sort of the umbrella on which all of this connects to. So anyone that's saying we don't want CRT, or we don't want this, or we don't like even some of the indigenous pieces that might be coming out when they're pushing for certain things like land acknowledgements, everything's kind of coming under this umbrella. And that is where some people are going, I don't agree with that. Where is this coming from? But this is the curriculum that allows all of these things to be taught in our schools. So the main thing why it's got a lot of people concerned, it is shifting the focus from academics to basic social skills. And this isn't social skills on how to say please and thank you, or manners and etiquette. This is how you exist in our current culture, where nobody's wrong and we don't want to offend anybody. And so we're training that. And there's only so much time in day. I know this from experience. So I have 6.5 hours to try to get through all my subject matter. And we're allowed to focus primarily on our subject matter. A lot of the public systems will have the subject matter, and they have to use that to teach all of these concepts. And I'm going to give you an example of what that looks like. And it's actually really scary when you see how it's used. A lot of programs that they have, there's about 44 different SEL programs out there. They almost always will remove the parents from the equation. So they really don't want them involved. And we see that with when they're trying to pass legislation or they're doing things in school. They're like, we don't want the parents involved. Like the parents are always the bad guy. The parents are always they're the ones that are going to hurt the child if they find out about something. And we know that's not the case. Now, there's a reverential fear of your parents. You should be like, if you stayed out past curfew or something, and you should be scared of your parents coming down on you. But you should never be afraid to talk about personal things with your parents. Now, is every parent perfect? I'm not saying that. There are some there's some issues, and I know kids need counseling. And I'm going to explain again what this looks like in different families, but this is part of the issue too. We don't want to just push all parents out of the equation. The main goals of SEL, which I'm going to outline, they connect directly with global initiatives and not necessarily local ones. So again, sometimes we're seeing things happening in Calgary, in Alberta, or even in Canada, and we're going, what's going on? And it's the same things happening all over the globe. So it's like, how do we have that much cohesion? If we had that much cohesion in everything, there'd be world peace and no wars. And yet we're somehow able to all agree to teach the same thing in every classroom, from here to Great Britain to Australia to China. So there's some other thing that's organizing and coordinating everybody.
Right, like UNESCO type programs. Copy that.
Yes. And I'm going to show you some UN stuff in a minute. So, and then it's also showing that social skills, I have that in quotes, can be easily changed into creating pluralistic thinking. The amount of data mining that's done through SEL is a big danger. The amount of data collection, they put kids through an incredible amount of questionnaires. And that's been one of the big issues from parents in the States. Where is all that data going? Is it following my child in any way? And there's some evidence it could be following them all the way. Now people are going to get jobs and they're able to look back and see where they stood on an issue, if they had anxiety when they were in grade 2. And so now that may be an impetus to not getting a job later on. And so that really scares parents, how much information is being collected. And it's different in different places. But when you're filling out a survey, you don't know where it's going, and you have 8-year-olds filling in a survey, it's a little disconcerting where their data is being stored. And then lastly, there's a quote values-based. They all say it's values-based. We use that term a lot, and it sounds like really lovely and ethereal. It's like, oh, we're all have good values, but it's never actually clearly defining what those values are, who's creating these values, who's determining the value. We're just saying they're values-based. So again, looking back to see where those came from. So children are being asked to affirm what the state has decided is acceptable. You can go to the next slide if you want while I'm reading this. It's encouraging our students to research, think critically, and be courageous is what we want them to do. It's been said that SEL is part of the normal education curriculum, but the problem is, why has it become a thing in the last little while if it's just a normal part? So I had a quote here: social emotional learning is the delivery system of the ideology, all these ideologies, into our K-12 school. So I have an example here. If you see critical race and cultural responsive teaching, notice they're both CRT. So it's interesting they actually have the same thing. And so one is like CRT light. That's the culturally responsive teaching. So an example of that, as I said, we're moving away from the academics. If I say taught a math lesson and I said, Macy was on a road trip to Edmonton and she was going 150 miles an hour. How long will it take her to arrive? So you would normally think there's a mathematical equation that's going to be there. Well, in a culturally responsive teaching model, I would stop the class and go, okay, Macy is driving in a car with her family to Edmonton. Now, is that right that she's in a car? Is the car the best way to get there? Is that good for the environment? So that would give us on a conversation there. And then Macy's with her family. Now, are all families the same? What can families look like? And then that would start another conversation. So you keep using that. Notice there's no actual math being addressed in this question.
Even the morality, like if I'm trying to put myself in the shoes of somebody wanting to bring in the morals, and I'm like, okay, you said driving like 150 kilometers an hour. That's the first. I'm like, okay, there's the moral lesson. Let's not drive 150. But that's it. It stops there. Anything that you just listed, I did not even think of. And the fact that that's where your brain would go to teach the kids, I'm like, shoot.
And that's where the kids are. They're not thinking that way until we guide them down that path, because we're like, no, we need to answer all these questions, but they're not going there unless they're being led.
Right.
And so, like, even the world I'm in, most kids think the opposite gender has cooties still. Like and to me, that's a healthy 9-year-old. So they're really not asking any other questions. So if they say they are, it has to wonder what other questions were asked to lead them to those questions.
Right.
So, and then with critical race theory from there, again, you've probably heard this in the past. This actually came from a university level concept years and years ago.
Yep.
To talk about systemic issues that were real issues in different places in the United States. It was an actual conversation, but to now start implementing it like a grade 1 level with an ideology that was not meant for 6-year-olds to process. It's not right. And you'll even notice there, it says relevant fields. It's law and other fields. I don't know, but my grade 4s are not getting ready to go into law with this conversation. So we're not really preparing them for what they need. And then you'll notice the decolonized mathematics. Yeah. This is fascinating. You may have heard math is racist. because it seeks to have the right answer. That is usually the argument, that there can only be one right answer.
Right, and who
and
defines right and wrong? Okay.
and who defined the right answer, who decided 2 + 2 = 4, why can 2 + 2 not equal 5? And so because of that was all from British colonialism that has somehow permeated all of our education. And so now we need to decolonize math. There's actually a 2-day PD session I came across about 2 or 3 years ago in Ontario that the teachers went to for 2 days for professional development to learn how to decolonize math. So yeah,
I would love to go
this,
there just so I can like sit and listen and go like, what?
so it's worrisome when you think about it. And then I just put one on here, but you would not believe the amount of curricula that's out there right now that's centered completely on social justice and then a subject matter. So social justice in math, social justice in LA. And I teach grade 4. It's enough just to try to figure out long division, let alone trying to put in the world's problems with all of this other stuff into it. So I don't think we actually don't do either topic well when we start doing that. So I'm going to just move on to here. So here's our bunny trail.
Yeah.
Follow me. So see the little bunny trail. I'm such a teacher. I'm sorry.
I love it.
Yep.
So before I get to Alice Bailey, I want to point something out, and we're going to go through a neat little connection here. So as I mentioned, our policies are coming from, you've heard words like SDGs and ESGs from the UN.
Yes.
So if you go to the SDGs for the UN, their number 4 goal, 4.7, it is take right from their website for global goals. This is the education for sustainable development and global citizenship. So the number 4 goal is education based. And I'm going to read their exact quote from their target 4.7. By 2030, that date just shows up everywhere, ensure that all learners acquire the knowledge and skills needed to promote sustainable development, including, among others, through education for sustainable development and sustainable lifestyles, human rights, gender equality, promotion of culture of peace and nonviolence, global citizenship, and appreciation of cultural diversity, and of culture's contribution to sustainable development. So that sounds really nice. And it sounds like, oh, I want to get behind that. But in global vernacular, as you ladies know, sustainability is always code for reduced quality of life. So it means a system that's self-perpetuating. And I know even my students, they will ask me like, how do wars start? And we talk about socialism and communism and trying to explain that for a 9-year-old. It's hard, but easy at the same time. I think if we explain socialism like we were talking to 9-year-olds, it's a lot easier. And in their own words, they go, oh, that doesn't work. One student said this year, they're just equal in their misery. So we talked about equality. We're just equal in our misery. I'm like, that was very well defined after I explained how it worked. We're equal, but in our misery. That's a discussion about Canada for another day. And it's interesting, again, as a Christian, we see God was the first person to create a sustainable system. He created everything to perpetuate after itself. But the words global citizens are the loaded term here. It's sounding really good. I used it myself in writing papers, but there's a little bit problem with a global citizen. That means they all need to be agreeing on the same thing, and it's being taught through this curriculum. So in simple terms, it's another quote, the SDGs are the why, and ESGs, as you've heard before, is the how. So the ESG factors, you've heard about your ESG scores, your equity, social governance, that you're doing all these things, can be roughly translated to your SDGs on a corporate level. So this is why schools are implementing it now, because it will be part of their ESG score. In short, it will show how well the organization or the school is adhering to their SDG goals. So this is the accountability piece, that they are doing what's being required here. So in order to do that, there was a woman at the very beginning of the founding of the UN named Alice Bailey. And she's a little bit of a wingnut. But she was born in 1880. So it was a long time ago. And she formed something called the Lucifer Publishing Company. And that just sounded a little too on point. So they did change the name to Lucius Trust, so that, like, again, change the name so it doesn't sound quite as like demonic. But she was promoting the dissemination of wisdom literature through a publishing company. This publishing company, Lucius Trust, manages the meditation room at the UN. So the UN, because people have been doing more research, they scrubbed their website to not have a connection to her, but her publishing company is the one that gives all the money to continue funding their entire meditation room. And I'll explain some of what that is. So her ideas were the actual founding goals of the UN. So when it was just the League of Nations turning into the United Nations, she was the one. It's like, this is what we need to do. These are going to be our goals. And she's considered the mother of the New Age movement as well. So there's a connection there between the two. Her theories have been postulated into a 10-point plan. If you look up and the computer will try to correct you and say she didn't have a 10-point plan. What you have to realize is all of her research and readings were postulated into these 10 points that people have this is how you could summarize all of her readings. If you can't read all of her dozens of books, this is basically what she was advocating for.
Yeah.
So, and I'm going to read what these are, and it's shocking when you think about it. But this is an interesting quote about the UN meditation room. So in 1956, the UN Secretary General Dag, and I cannot pronounce this last name, Hammarskjöld, turned the interdenominational prayer chapel into a New Age meditation chamber. A 6.5-ton block of iron ore was deposited in the center of the room with a polished top lit by a single beam of light from the ceiling. The light depicts the divine wisdom, and the block depicts an empty altar representing the God worshipped in many different forms. The iron ore also represents the metal from which weapons are made, and the New Age hope that the power of meditation, world peace, can be achieved. He said, "We thought we could bless by our thoughts and the very material with which guns are made. This is the New Age concept of the power of thinking." He said the meditation room was a place where people could withdraw into themselves and feel the void. So I point that out because a huge component of SEL is meditation and mindfulness training. And they have the kids doing things like yoga and mindfulness training directly in the classroom. So you will have kids literally sitting in the lotus position, humming. That's part of how they calm themselves down because they're in a world that's in upheaval. And so until you realize where the origins of SEL came from, you don't realize why that's there. And some people who are maybe more innocent minded think it's an innocent thing. Oh, they're just meditating. They're just going into themselves. But there's a danger there when they realize where it's actually coming from. So this is her 10 points, Alice Bailey's 10 points postulated from everything that she read. So this is what she said needs to happen. Again, keeping in mind this was put together in the 1930s. Keep in mind, think of what was happening in the 1930s. So number 1, take God and prayer out of the education system. 2, reduce parental authority over the children. 3, destroy the Judeo-Christian family structure or the traditional Christian family structure. Number 4, if sex is free, make abortion legal and make it easy. Number 5, make divorce easy and legal, free people from the concept of marriage for life. Make homosexuality an alternative lifestyle. Number 7, debase art and make it run mad. Number 8, use the media to promote and change mindset. Number 9, create an interfaith movement. And number 10, get governments to make all of these into law and get the church to endorse these changes. So that was her plan on how to actually implement all of her ideologies. So if you go to the next slide, this is kind of where the bunny trail was, because as I did my research, I was trying to synthesize what I was seeing. So if you start researching SEL, you start off with CASEL. CASEL is the Collaboration for Academic, Social, and Emotional Learning. So that is the head area that you will find. And it was founded in 1994 through the Fetzer Institute. It was through educators and philanthropists. Names like Coleman and Rockefeller were connected with the founding of with CASEL. Then if we go to the Fetzer Institute, that was heavily influenced by Alice Bailey. They are funding the meditation room and they were connected with the UN. They are the primary supporter of CSE, Comprehensive Sexual Education, which partners with Planned Parenthood in the United States. And then from there, we have the SDGs. And you mentioned UNESCO earlier. This functions through here. It's a member of the UN Global Compact, which signifies the commitment to the UN Sustainable Development Goals. So all of these are directly connected this way. And a great resource, if anyone wants to really go down the bunny trail, and see the Cheshire Cat, you can go to Dr. James Lindsay. He actually was in Calgary, I think 2 years ago, but he has an amazing website you can check out. And he takes you really all the way down and really explains all of the pieces for you. But if you go to the next page, this is an actual quote from the Fetzer Institute. So this is how they are seeing things. And it sounds very flowery, uniting science and spirituality since 1962, which is interesting because most people think science and religion don't connect together. But when you connect it as a word spirituality, everyone's kind of okay with it that way. And again, that's where the mindfulness piece comes in. So if you go ahead 2 slides, this is where it gets implemented in the, I can read this. This is an interesting one. Satan disguises himself in submission. Satan disguises submission to himself under a ruse of personal autonomy. He never asks us to become his servants. Never once did the serpent say to Eve, I want to be your master. The shift in commitment is never from Christ to evil. It is always from Christ to self. And instead of his will, self-interest now rules, and what I want reigns. And that is the essence of sin. And so this is kind of, we'll go to the next slide. This is where we are in our world, where everyone is a victim. And this is where it connects with the SEL. So if you look at the one slide where it says tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, that is how things are taught in the classroom. So the bottom tier is the Mind Matters, the classroom SEL curriculum. We are basically starting out with a classroom insinuating everyone is traumatized by something in life. That's not the case. We've all had like childhood trauma in some way. Something bad happened to us, not all at the same level. Some kids have experienced horrendous trauma, and those kids do need strategies and skills, and we need to work with them through it. But to come into a classroom of 30 kids with the premise that all kids are victims and treating them that way and teaching them you're a victim, someone out there has wronged you in some way. You need to figure out who that person is or that group is, and you need to come against them. So when that's kind of your premise, we're going to run into some problems. So you'll notice how that aligns with the other triangle there. That is intergenerational trauma and cultural trauma. And then when you get to tier 2, now we have the small groups. And now that's getting into disrupted neurodevelopment, the issues with the brain. I know you ladies love to talk about the brain a lot. And then tiered 3, we have individual SEL support, and you'll notice how that connects with social, emotional, cognitive impairment. And this is where we get into words like neurodiversity that we're hearing a lot. And we often hear neurodiversity is directly connected with some of the transgender pieces. They always seem to kind of align. And I couldn't quite figure out how those dots connected. And I sat in a PD, and my brain connects things. I don't know if it always should be connected, but I found it fascinating. They did 2 things. One, they showed an umbrella of neurodiversity and all the things that fall underneath it. And one of those things actually was trans and a bunch of different things. I went, that's interesting. And then I don't know why I didn't catch it before, but they talked about on the spectrum. We talk about that when we're talking about autism, they're on the spectrum. And they showed a picture and it's a rainbow. And I was like, wait a minute here. And I'm like, okay. And we have rainbows in places now that often talk about all these different diverse people that they actually say neurodiverse people don't adhere to societal norms. They see the world differently and they advocate for those differences. So suddenly I started going, okay, I'm seeing a rainbow. We're actually saying spectrum. And I'm like from my teacher head, and I teach science as well as math. I'm like, okay, spectrum, rainbow. I felt like there's some connection there that they almost were silently trying to point out. And I'm going, this is very interesting. And if you have a group of people who they know do not adhere to societal norms and are going to see the world differently, they're very easily manipulated to do things. And if you are all teaching a curriculum where you're teaching that everyone is a victim, you're going to go down a path that's very dangerous. So if you go to the next page, or next slide, I should say, this is where this gentleman comes in. Again, if you go to Dr. James Lindsay, he has like a 6-part series on Paulo Freire. But he's the one who actually started this concept of the pedagogy of the oppressed. So this is where he's coming from. It's a focus on how students' lived experience should create their basis for reality. And your personal experience is necessary for truth in every situation. Is that actually the case? Just because you experience something doesn't necessarily that's what reality is, right? And this is actually the very definition of a fallacious argument. So this ends up being the foundation of CRT and even Indigenous activism. Are we saying we never actually point out some people have had good experiences? Like I actually, and I may get in trouble for saying this, I was a teacher I work with, and she actually said she knows someone who, her mother knew someone who went to a residential school, and she actually had a positive experience there. She actually had met some wonderful people who helped her. It's in Saskatchewan, I believe. And now, am I saying that's the case on all of them? No, but I'm also not saying, is it the case that everything's bad? So when we kind of cut out and say we can't have a positive experience somewhere with something, and we're only ever focusing on the negative side of things, is that reality? Because reality is really never either one. There's people who are going to have positive stories of something that happened. So are we encouraging alternative viewpoints? No. And if we don't, as you ladies know, that turns into groupthink. So his understanding was if we are treating everyone as the oppressed, and he was structuring his understanding of education and knowledge on Marxist theory. So that's why a lot of people say, what's happening to education? It feels like we're going towards communism and Marxism. It's because of his influence on the education system, because he was Marxist in himself. He didn't feel that education needed to actually educate you on content. It was solely for political purposes. And as I gave an example of cultural responsive teaching, you can use education to teach anything you want to a child. So if you turn to the next slide, this is a word you're hearing it with AI, but it's also a word in education is generative. It's the real reason for education is simply to teach political ideas. That was his entire concept. His focus was political literacy, not actual literacy, which is why we actually have kids who are having trouble reading, but they can go out and protest and they can be activists. And that was his premise. We want to teach activism. And I don't know if people realize this, even when we go do PDs, sometimes there's a focus. You have to say, like, what was your takeaway from this PD? How can it be applied? And normally it would be like, I learned something in math, I can apply it in this lesson the next day. There's actually areas though, the wording's being changed to how can you use it as an activist? So, and it's how can I teach the kids to use this to become activists for something? And not that I have a problem with someone being an activist for something, but when we're teaching the kids that everything needs to be a protest, everything needs to be an argument, everything needs to be, you're a victim, so you need to stand up for something. This is what creates the world we're in. We can't have civil dialogue. You don't agree with me, so we automatically need to be arguing with each other, and you need to be silenced, and you're just evil, and you're some ism or ist because you disagree with me, and we don't have a civil conversation anymore. So, and this is why we're seeing that educators all around are trying to voice their concerns. They're not teaching academics anymore. And some places in the States have actually started offering legislative protection for teachers teaching SEL because they feel they're actually they're being forced to act like psychologists when we don't have the training to be a psychologist in the classroom. Because if you're I'm here to treat 30 kids who are all apparently traumatized victims, right, and now everything I do is going to treat you. They've actually had to provide protections that they won't be sued for basically practicing without a license, which again should make people just pause and think.
That's a big deal.
So the next few slides, I'm going to fly through. I just want people to see a connection between some concepts. So this is the first thing that they're trying to see is a connection between the oppressor and the oppressed. We've seen this in the news. We see how these are connecting. So then if you go to the next slide, this is where the colonization comes in. The colonizers are the oppressors. The colonized are anyone who was colonized, essentially. And that's imposing worldviews and cultivating and conquering. And the words at the bottom, fear, obey, follow, mimic, all of that. And then if you go to the next slide.
Just pausing here for a moment, I find this really funny because learning about colonialism, even this dichotomy doesn't work because they would assume like most white Europeans are the colonizers. Meanwhile, you could look at every Commonwealth country and we're technically still Commonwealth colonized countries based off of all of our policy. So it's just an interesting dichotomy that doesn't work.
No, it doesn't. And then it's funny, it's sort of funny, they say the teachers would be the oppressors and the students would be the oppressed. Hopefully not in my classroom, but again, it was interesting is how we're using it. So scientific knowledge, experiential knowledge. I just want to pause here for a minute because this is where I feel it gets scary. With the SEL concept, it is now, and you've probably heard words like exploratory learning, or
Yes.
kids like learn on their own, and interpretive dance and all that kind of stuff. What that's doing though is they want more peer-to-peer knowledge, and the teachers are no longer the arbiter of the wisdom and sharing. They want the kids to figure it out on their own. That never works when they're 9. It's one thing if you're a little older and you've put boundaries and guardrails on things and you kind of explain the way things are, and then you give them a safe place to explore. But when you're asking them just to find all these things themselves out, when it comes to gender or sex or something like that, 9-year-olds should not be finding the answers out for themselves. That's because they don't have the mental capacity to make choices and make decisions and do things yet. So the scientific knowledge, that's what we can give. Yes, students have experiential knowledge, but I think teachers have experiential knowledge to share with their students in a safe place, to make sure that kids don't make bad choices, and that we can give them some type of guardrails for all of these things. And notice Eva says like reflective dialogue. I think this is very important that we need to have. I also don't feel teachers should be advocating their worldview on children. I have a little bit more freedom in my environment to know that I can share what I have to say. But even when I taught in the States, for instance, I never once would say Democrat bad, Republican good.
Right.
I never did that. And I had to teach elections and things like that. My whole thing was we listen to what people have to say. We listen to their ideas. We ask questions. We see if they have a bias. We do our research. And that's how we decide. Because if we paint everything with one brush, we could miss people sharing good ideas. Now I think our politics is so incredibly polarized. It almost feels like that, but I'm very careful never to say that. It was very cute when we had our last election, provincial election, and they asked me who I voted for. I didn't share it. They asked who I voted for. And I mentioned I voted for Danielle Smith, and half my class was shocked. And I was shocked that they were shocked. And this is part of my concern why I wanted to come on here is a lot wanted NDP, and they go, their parents wanted NDP. And I'm like, and they go, can you explain to us the difference? So I did the continuum. I think you may have seen this continuum before, where it has anarchy on one side and dictator on the middle. And then there's the center, and then there's right. And they knew about communism and socialism because we had a discussion about that on Remembrance Day in a novel that we were reading. And then I just plotted our parties on the line. And so, conservative kind of put center, but slightly right of center. I showed the Liberal Party, showed how the NDP was actually further down than Liberal, which I think some people are very shocked with when you point that out. My best friend and her husband a long time ago voted NDP, and my mom was like, what are you thinking? That was the Social Credit Party of Canada back in the 80s. They go, we forgot.
Oh.
And so,
wow.
So as a teacher, I'm like, we need to educate because people have forgotten, because we hear the word new Democrat and we think this is good, right? It's democracy. It's like, and we've forgotten our history, and we've forgotten what the book said, and we've forgotten where we've come from. And so again, with the kids, just pointing it out, I didn't have to say this is bad or this is good. I just showed, and what they already understood about communism and socialism and where that fell on the spectrum, they saw and they went, oh. And then they asked, like, how does socialism work? And that goes to the conversation I said earlier, where they figured it out and went, oh, that just means we're equal in our misery. So it's when kids can make that connection, that's allowing exploratory learning. But just to like go out and find the answers, it's not safe. So see if I had any other little tidbits here. Okay, last bit. This was with Paulo Fry, again, just to clear this up. He wanted to replace actual education with politically themed education, always looking for that activist takeaway, to get the learner to see through the eyes of the oppressed. That is how you create an activist. This creates a loss of relevance of learning. And I found this fascinating, this quote: why should I learn X, Y, Z if the world is horrible and we're all going to die in a couple of years? Like, why should I even learn if the caps are melting? I forget what the issue is right now. Caps are melting. Something's happening.
The ice caps, yeah.
And that's the main thing why climate change connects with this, because that's the one thing we all have in common, the planet, right? So if you want to get everybody on board, the common thing is we all breathe the same air
And we're all going
and
to
we all
die.
drink water. And so that's the one thing we can all unite around. We need to do this. And so you have this common point of now that whole in the intersectionality, we've all come together here as human beings on the planet. And from there, we start going into our little factions. But this is what we have in common. And it makes you feel important that you've, connected with everyone else on the planet. And the focus of this pedagogy of the oppressed is denouncing one idea. So if you say this is bad, then you're insinuating something else is better. But in this concept in SEL or any of these, you're never actually allowed to say what that good idea is.
Right. Right.
And we have that all the time. We're like, no, like even the conservatives are like, no, that's wrong. But or dare I say independents, they will come out and say the separatists, and they'll say that's wrong. But they can never give one definitive reason why we shouldn't separate from Canada, as an example. They'll just say that's wrong and they'll demonize it, but they can never give a good idea. And again, that's where our conversation needs to go. And I think that's about it for now, unless you have questions for me. I'm always good with questions.
Macy, do you have one at the top before? Because of course I have questions. You and I always have questions.
I'll let you go, because if I go, I'm going to have too much thoughts coming out of my brain. So let's hone myself down as well with the questions, and it'll help guide my thinking, because otherwise I'm going to be like...
Okay, well, one thing that you had alluded to in your presentation, I wanted to go back to that mindfulness thing, because now, having read some of the things you've alluded to with the Lucis Trust, Alice Bailey, and then UNESCO, even the spiritualism movement back in the 1800s, because I've done research into the history of the feminist movement, a lot of it interconnects, and I can see how that's playing into the thing. But a big contention that, younger girls that I've talked to had was, okay, so they can get on board with the fact that these ideas, the parents being out of the classroom is not a good thing, and kids not being taught how to read, not a good thing. But they don't get on board with, wait, so the mind and mindfulness meditation is evil. So if I were them, I would be asking you, Serena, do you think meditation is evil, and is mindfulness bad?
So I would say no, depending on what you were focusing on. So I'm going to answer it through my biblical worldview. So my biblical worldview tells me that I don't want to clear my mind of everything and go to a blank space. I don't want to go to a place where there's nothing. I'm going to where the source of my faith is, and I'm going to God to help me clear my mind. And I've actually heard, I guess you call it Christian mindfulness, but a little bit different than that. Instead of just going out into the world in the forest and just staring at everything and taking it all in, or gardening, we'll use gardening. As your fingers are going into the soil, thinking about, I have a powerful God that created this. All the lessons that we have in scripture about gardens and learning and tilling and planting, and what lessons you're teaching me, and what do you want me to know today, God? And how can I clear my mind of all the junk that's out there? And what do you want to show me today? And it's not about me, and it's not about all the things that I'm worrying about today. What lessons do you want me to teach today? So I think it's where your mindfulness focuses on, and it needs to be away from us, because the problem in our culture is always going introspective to me. How is this impacting me? How am I the victim? And we need to come outside and go, I serve a bigger God. And I feel personally that if I am serving a bigger God, then that gives me purpose in the world. When we remove that, people don't have purpose and a function anymore. And so why bother? I can do whatever I want. I'm my own God. I can create what I want. I can create my own identity. But maybe it's a really mind-boggling concept to think that a God out there designed me to look the way he wanted me to look, to be as tall as I am, to have the color of hair that I have, to have a skill set that's unique to me, that he designed me to do something that nobody else on this planet can do. And that gives me purpose. And so that's where I want my mind to go, not just into myself. So
Right, Macy, any comments?
Like, so when I'm thinking of the mindfulness and what you're talking about, to me, it's always that funny little anecdote that comes forward by people where it's like you can't really be a true atheist because everyone can get very like dogmatic very quickly about something. You can make anything religiously dogmatic if you choose
yeah,
to. And I feel like that searching for something outside of yourself is a very human thing to do.
yeah,
And
yeah,
I think that they've transitioned it though to, I guess, the activism portion, right? Of like that self-centeredness, but
yeah,
it's funny because they're taking things that are natural about the human disposition, like trying to outsource to community to try and negotiate your reality. Well, yeah, like all the time you're going to people and you're asking for validation because you're trying to see, like, do you agree with the thing that's going on here? Are you seeing what
yeah,
I'm seeing, right? Because then again, when you have people in isolation in like psych wards, right, they lose their minds, right? And so without an external human being to talk to, have an interaction to affirm what's going on in reality, so they're not just in their heads, right? And so if you are just in your head and they are doing a sort of meditation, sort of practice where they get you to feel isolated within yourself,
yeah,
and that's the difference. That's a different kind of meditation because if you're meditating just for the sake of like reach externally, like sometimes like people, whether you're Christian or otherwise,
yeah,
gratitude is something that a lot of people say go forward in that to try and help you out. Like pay attention to service to other people. Sometimes it's not about you. Like if you maybe you're focused too much on yourself, and if you
yeah,
focused on other people, it might make you feel like, oh, like right, there's more of the world than just me, right? But
yes,
unfortunately, they aren't focusing that for young people, and it's sad because it's almost like they are like using a sort of here's how the world is impacted by you, and so it is sort
mhm,
of like here's something beyond yourself, right? Of climate change and I guess women's rights and like critical
yeah,
race theory, and so they have something natural about especially young people to save the world syndrome, right?
yeah,
Thinking that you can go and do this thing, but then it's not really. It's kind of cultish. It's like, okay, so like on a grander scale of a society, what you have now is you have a group of people that, again, group think, they all think the same way. And instead of, I guess, anything that is opposed to what it is that they think and they feel and whatever, it's there's no such thing as something that is like whatever's wrong is morally wrong, like morally evil, and then they treat it as such, and then it's like, well,
yeah,
like evil must be silenced, but what's wrong can be debated, right? But that anything else is evil, silence it, right? And it's like, whoa, it
yeah,
could be wrong, but you have to defend your point. But
yes,
they're not doing that. And so even when you were mentioning Alice Bailey and the work that we've kind of done even into the feminism movement, it's kind of a similar structure where they get you so like perpetually in a mindset of like a woman has to do everything on her own and she can do it, and
hmm,
girl boss CEO and all of that.
yeah,
And then it's like, well, hold on, community is like a huge part of how a woman and men function in a society.
yes,
And then what they do is, well, your community is your activist community. Like you have your little club, right? But then that is a sort of like, yeah, miserable in our suffering equally kind of mentality.
And the big thing with SCL is the collectivist individual mentality. So they are very much, you are here and this is how you feel. And how does the collective need to change to make you feel comfortable in the world? And we see that in legislation even being passed. Someone feels a certain way, and I have to agree with their reality. And I literally have to change everything about how I do things, maybe even a change room. I have to accept your reality in my change room, to make you feel comfortable. But it's never reciprocated. It's never the other way around. There's only certain people that are allowed to get the collective to change for the individual. And again, based on my worldview, my savior died for everyone, and he holds me individually responsible. So my choices are based on me, not on how all of you respond to me, right? But if we say I only am responding this way because you and you didn't do this, and so I'm forced to do this, and you're not affirming me in some way, whatever that list is going to look like, So then therefore I'm allowed to do X, Y, and Z. That's scary at the end of the day for what you're actually held accountable for.
Well, that's the
So
funny thing. I mean, personal accountability, you would
Mhm.
figure, because personal, meaning me, you think, so even though you can make the argument that it's all self-centered, it's clearly also not self-centered, because they don't think about what can I reasonably do. It's that prayer: God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, courage to change the things I can, and wisdom to know the difference. That really taught me that, oh, I have a decision in my actions.
Mhm.
I actually get a say in these things. So even this meditation, when you described it, you described not a mindfulness, you described a mindlessness. And there is two different, as me and
yes,
Macy would call it, modes of attention, ways to use meditation, as you alluded to. Meditation, and we've seen this in especially young people, again, when their brains, as you also alluded to, not finished developing, so decision making is difficult. And then you add in, okay, pharmaceuticals, then the school systems, and then the households and all of that other things.
yeah,
But we've seen, one of the things you described is with the mindlessness, this, oh, everything is so amazing, and, taking in everything, that so much so that you're not really taking in, actually acknowledging the
yeah,
dirt that's in your hands. You too are
yeah,
overwhelmed by the awe of, you can't even define it because you're so overwhelmed by it.
hmm,
My dad likes to say, that's, you're so heavenly minded, you're no earthly good.
yeah,
And then there's also, you're so earthly good that you're no heavenly minded. So it's
yeah,
like, and there
yeah,
there is that balance of acknowledging the dirt. And sometimes with academia, we find young people that they believe everything within what they can see, and so the material world is all that is. But then they
yeah,
forget about, when they go down that path, they think the academia is the end all be all, or the politics, and then they forget to look about community, or community that isn't just necessarily for the end use of whatever their goal is. And then there's also,
yeah,
but if you're too heavenly minded, then you don't actually touch. You think that sounds heavenly minded, that you're connected with other people, but you're not. Both
yeah,
isolate you, and isolation is literally the opposite. The way that I understand God and the universe, which is funny because the brain actually helped me understand God better. It was actually looking introspectively, looking at the
mhm,
gift he gave me, and I went, I think
yeah,
I understand him a lot better now, because this is what he wanted me to start researching and understanding. And
yeah,
so understanding that, you understand the connectivity of everything. The just same way that our neurons work is
hmm,
literally the same way that you can look at the ecosystems or the universe and all of the particles in the ionosphere. It's the same
yeah,
interconnectivity. So what Macy was alluded to is that isolation, and them trying to, that even false dichotomy of the individual versus the collective. It's like
hmm,
you don't really get one without the other. And understanding the connectivity and isolation is the opposite of what we're meant to be. That is like, it allows the nuance of a moving, flowing world to come back into
hmm,
being. And then you look at people not as oppressors or static things. Even looking
hmm,
at you, Serena, if I were to look at you solely as a teacher, I could
hmm,
apply 30,000 labels. Like you said, I could, all the teacher pretty little descriptions that I could put upon you,
yeah,
but then I don't treat you like a human being that can change their mind and can negotiate with me anymore. And
yeah.
that's such a big thing that has infiltrated the minds of everybody. It's complicated.
It is. It is. And it's a bigger conversation we need to have. But I think it's, as I've said when I've emailed you before, all of this is the crux of where we are right now as a culture, where we are as a province, when we're like, how are people not seeing this? Not understanding why decisions are being made, very emotional, thinking individually how things are impacting you politically, and not going how this is impacting the younger people, how these decisions are going to impact you guys in 20 years if we don't make certain decisions politically and change things. And we've made it all about us and not realizing how our choices can impact each other, and how your vote and what you do is going to also impact me. And so we need to see that, like, are we mutually helping each other to be successful?
Hmm.
Um, yeah.
I do have a final question, but Mace, do you have
Okay.
anything before I throw that in there?
I feel like this is like it's a conversation that can go on for like 5 more hours. That's why it's so hard.
Well, I know I've been feeling that too. We'll have her back on because I do
Yeah.
think she can teach us more.
Yes, definitely. Because I'm like, there's so much to unpack here. But yeah,
Well,
I
I
think
know I have to share with you sometime. There's what got me on this bunny trail was the research on Greek education and Hebrew education. So
Oh,
Greek education teaches you to become citizens of the state,
mm,
and Hebrew education is teaching you to become citizens of heaven. And so it's interesting when you look at where our education came from all the way back. And I mean, thousands of years back, how we got to this trajectory. It's fascinating. So,
that would be
that'd be cool.
a fantastic
We
conversation.
definitely should do that.
That's very. It's very funny you say that because there's a big conservative, like talking about the Hebrew education thing of heaven. That's funny because there's this conservative psyop going on right now that anything related to Islam, Muslim, no bueno. And I get that the concern is to, what is that thing? Mediate, the immigration. That makes sense. But then to call all Muslims or all Islamists as bad and incompatible with our nation, it doesn't make sense, and it ignores all of their context and their history clearly, because some people in that culture know their history.
yeah.
It's like for them to you look at them as if with all your labels the same way that not all of us know our history. Like I don't even know that history, so you can't make
Yeah.
the assumption and box all of them the same way you can't do with all of us. So that's
On a side note, Glenn Beck did a wonderful thing on the difference between Islam and Islamism. He did a
right.
fascinating, like 2 hour piece on that. And that was like, oh, okay. So what we're actually looking at, that was fascinating. So,
Right, there's a difference. That's
yeah.
awesome. So you want to
My final thought. I'm like, oh, I have so many. Okay, my final thoughts then would be like even trying to navigate, I guess, what we know even from our work on the hemispheres and trying to relate this here is one of the things that I would obviously advocate for is that it's still downstream of you and what's going on inside your brain. So you have to be aware as a young person, especially even a parent maybe that's trying to figure out how to navigate this as well. Because you might agree with some of the rhetoric, but also not. And I think that that's the key distinction and nuance here is that like this is still something to be negotiated. And I think when Serena was bringing forward even the, I guess, nefarious minds that are coming in and
the funding
funding and putting it through the back
implementing it,
door.
yeah.
I think that that's the thing that obviously I would encourage people to pay attention to is why would someone want to take us this direction, right? But then all of the nuances of trying to, okay, like we can have one conversation even on meditation alone and what are the nuances there and what can it be used for that's useful and not, right? And then same thing with so many of the other key sort of phenomenons that were presented in this presentation, like, so oppressed versus oppressor, right? And it's like, well, hold on, even you yourself can be both, right? And so what are the nuances there? And so I think that would be my sort of encouragement of trying to figure out how do you hold them in both hands and try, and no matter what life is going to be in your negotiation with it is going to be the thing where you have to start looking going like, okay, so like there's two things that are true at the same time, right? Because you can be feeling like you're, I guess, sort of oppressed by something, someone, an experience, whatever, right? But at the same time, you could also be the exact oppressor of yourself because you're like, oh, shoot, like I'm not taking a new perspective or I'm not taking responsibility for the fact that this is bothering me. And maybe you're right that it's bothering you. But at the same time, you have to ask yourself, what am I going to do about it? Because trying to change the entire world or another person just to make you feel more comfortable, it's like it's an understandable thing that human beings all do because when you learn new knowledge, you're like, oh, wow, this is great. Other people need to know it. It's like, well, why do other people need to know it? It's like, well, that's a good question. Why do other people need to know what you feel is important to you? And that's something that you have to ask yourself. And it does play into building civilizations and it does play into building the world and the culture around you, right? But then it's also like, how far do you take it? And when is it a little bit too far, right? Because then we're getting into the questions of like, well, do we kill people in the name of Jesus or in the name of like a soji? Like, right? You don't do either. It's not a good idea. Like, so that would probably be, I guess, like my tiny little tidbit. But oh my gosh, there's so much here to unpack. It's insane.
No, that's the word that you said, Macy, is like trying to figure out, and this whole conversation has been, and what Serena, you advocated for was, dialogue, negotiation. You were like, truth requires you listening to one another, and there's a lack of that nowadays. But from that figuring out sort of perspective, and you said, okay, the thing with social emotional learning and the oppressors versus the oppressed, they're always identifying the problem. In your mind, Serena, what are some solutions? If not SEL, what should we be doing? And what's the better school system? What's the better idea that parents can take away from this, or kids, teachers that are trying to figure out how to negotiate better with their kids, as you did with the political voting that went along? So what are some solutions in your brain to this?
I think it's coming at everything from a non-biased perspective in the classroom specifically. Having conversations, I try to have mine as neutral as possible and letting the kids share their stuff, not having, now, again, my worldview, we have the Bible, so we are using that as our measuring rod, but having something where we're like, okay, we're going to have this conversation over here and we're going to open things up to ideas, not demonize people for their ideas. We've seen that time and time again, even on the internet. Someone who holds a different viewpoint, their teacher will silence them or call them some type of ism, particularly in high school when you're actually getting to that point where you're allowed to synthesize and you're getting ready to debate. I think we need to teach successful debating, not protesting. And there's a huge difference.
Yeah.
It's getting your thoughts together. It's articulating yourself. It's not automatically getting a board and then marching around and most people's argument seems to be F you. That seems to be most arguments. Whenever you see someone at a protest, that's literally all they have. Like, why are you here? And they just say that. And I'm like, that's your only argument as to why you're here. Like, they don't know why they're there. Probably because they're being paid, but that's a different discussion. But to go with what you were saying, even like the roots of where all of this was coming from, I have a funny connection. We had a tree in our backyard that fell. We didn't know why it died. It just completely died. And we had to get them to move it. And the neighbor behind us said something I'm very curious. The root was going underneath her yard. And she asked the tree guy, if I just poisoned the root, will that kill the whole tree? And to which we thought that was a curious thing to say. And he was like, so she had unwittingly put poison directly into the root in hopes just the root would die that was bothering her hot tub. It killed the whole tree, which interesting enough fell on her property. So that was but
oh, you're like karma.
Oh my God, you reap what you sow. Oh my God.
So when you think of what the impact the roots have on the whole tree,
right?
To go from there, when you see where the roots are from 80 years ago, even if you're not necessarily advocating for all of the pieces of SEL, that if you buy in and eat the fruit from that tree, what's been put into that root is going to be affected. So I think even adopting small pieces, we have to truly do our research as educators and parents, what's actually being advocated for. If we go down this path and we're doing this with our kids, what is the end goal? What do educators, what does the global culture require of our future global citizens? What do they actually need to do? What are they going to give up? What are they actually advocating for? So in the beginning, that's because Satan loves to make things look really enticing and make things look really good. And they've got lovely, cute little names and they have little graphics and stuff with them. But what happens when we keep going down that path? So we encourage conversations. Educators have been helping kids through emotional issues, kids that have had trauma for decades before there was officially social emotional learning and before it was an actual curriculum. So it's been done. When they say this is just a normal part of our education, if it's so normal, why was it just recently adopted and why is it now a name? So what was being done before when my mother was in school, my grandmother was in school, my great-grandmother, they were dealing with problems. They lived through the Depression. I think they probably had some bad days. I'm thinking they probably had some trauma, right? When we think of the things they lived through, people who lived through stuff in World War II, I'm assuming those people had some trauma. They didn't need to go through it because they weren't talking it out all the time. Like I'm of the opinion not every single issue needs to be talked to death. I think there's sometimes when you need to learn and you have a confidant and you encourage if they need to speak, you do, but it doesn't need to be this constant drawn out thing, because I think we can make things bigger than they actually are. And then that makes things worse. And that's where our conversation is in culture, right? We've talked so many things out. We have made mountains out of molehills that didn't need to be made. So I guess for parents, just continue to be the expert in the room. You've lived longer than your children. You've lived longer. You've seen more. And I think you can share that with them. And if you've developed a relationship from when your kids were very, very young, that they can come to you when there's a problem, that they can trust you, that you're not going to be, sugarcoating things, that you're going to be truthful with them, and that you're the safe place, not the school, not the government, not their friends, but you're their soft place to fall. You're their safe place. I think that's what you need. So that's what I've encouraged parents to do.
And then what's this slide? You said these are good programs?
So in my research, unfortunately, in some schools, they require it. So although a lot of schools are coming out and trying to say, we don't want this, there are 4 that are the safer ones, specifically pertaining to data collecting.
I see.
So these 4 specific ones do not collect data, and they're a fairly safe way to go if your school is requiring that you do something with SEL, if it's a policy, a mandate from head office or the district.
Right.
These are 4 that you can look into. There's even one called Bible Frenzy something. And it looks like it's a Christian one, and it's actually worse than the other ones.
Right.
And so just because it says Christian or faith-based, it doesn't necessarily mean that that's any better than the other ones. So
no, that's very true. That's why one of the recent podcasts we did, which was So You Think You Know Communism, we had Cynthia Chung and Colonel Towner Watkins, and they were addressing that very issue, the fact that these labels don't work. Just because you're labeled as an Islamist or a Christian or a communist or a conservative doesn't paint the picture. You really got to dig and follow the bunny trail.
I wanted to say one last thing because it also pinged on my brain, which was maybe even less some of the specifics, because the specifics you can probably research, but it's more like how you're choosing to demonstrate your protest, quote unquote, and your negotiation. If you're being an asshole, you're being an asshole. Sorry to swear, but it's true. And I was gonna say that you also So me and Maddie, we're having a conversation, or actually technically, we were giving a presentation about the Alberta independence movement, just because that's where we stand on it. But there were people in the background that were, I guess, quote unquote, hecklers, right? And they were talking about a program that was a governmental program that was being funded by our money, was aiding in potentially abortions, and they were really upset about that because they were like, no, you can't, that's not a bad thing, whatever, we're helping women that are getting raped and so okay. But I was finding a level of, I guess, sort of common ground with them, because I was like, well, what if this organization, screw the whole abortion topic for a minute, and what if it was just money laundering? What if, how can we prove that this quote unquote objective that young people are pursuing and they're in their activist pursuits, that there isn't some larger entity that is just manipulating that objective and that goal, no matter how pure you may think it is, right? It's if you can't verify that, then you are a pawn in someone else's game, right? And so that's something else that I think is worth looking into, just based on how Maddie and I have been going down the Gladio research and all of that, because that's how you create sort of counterinsurgent demonstrations where now you have toppling governments because the people say they're advocating for quote unquote freedom, right? But for all we know, it wasn't a government that was actually a dictatorship as they alluded to, right? People could look at Danielle Smith today and be like, she's a dictator, a traitor, whatever, right? You can look at even politicians that might be doing a good job, and then boom, you have an excuse, Hegelian dialect and problem, reaction, solution, to go in and solve, get rid of the problem that maybe wasn't a problem, as you were saying, you're talking something to death. It's that is something that I see very much coming forward with this sort of agenda and thinking, is this manipulation of young people when they have the sort of save the world mentality. It's like, okay, you're also not understanding where you stand in the larger game of people that want you to be doing that thing. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
They don't realize they're being manipulated
Yeah.
in their thinking. They don't realize it.
Yeah, that's not a bad thing to think about, because even if you want to give kudos to the young person that thinks, okay, it's a good idea to spread democracy, I mean, assuming that you guys agree on what democracy is,
Right.
if you meet that baseline and you're like, yeah, that's a good thing, okay, but can you prove that's actually what the government's doing, spreading democracy? Is that what they're doing? And then you have to prove it. We were talking to a couple, and they were arguing about the brain in related to sexes, so female brain, male brain. And one of the, I think it was the female, she said, you can't just generalize psychology, you know, there's a female brain, that's not, you're wrong. And then the counterpart was like, okay, can you bring up the study about the female brain? And she's like, he's like, I'll wait. She's like, okay. So she pulls out her phone, and then she tries to search, and then she Googles a couple websites, but she's like, that wasn't it. And then she found a short that she had found on Instagram that explained it to her. And so she's like, here. He said, okay, but that doesn't actually give me a source, you know, like a peer-reviewed study or something like that. Can you find that? And she went, and then did it some more. But even that process, even though the conversation there and then did not get resolved, it gave enough pause for her to go, shoot, like you alluded to in debate, the thing that makes a good debater is that you have to prove and look at both sides to see, okay, can I argue against it or can I argue for it? And so even there, you were shown that you could not prove your side with the thing that you thought you could. And so that's a good exercise.
I think it's also important how it's defined. I recall a long time ago when I was in a sociology class and we had to do a debate. And the debate was, is religion in decline in Canada? Is Christianity in decline in Canada?
Right.
And I was put on the yes side, and I was like, okay, I've got this. Like, this is going to be easy. And we went, and then the other side flipped it and redefined religion on us. And they defined atheism as a religion. And they said, if you define atheism as a religion, atheism is on the increase. So then therefore religion is not in decline in Canada. His source, however, was the professor's dissertation, which I thought was just cheating.
He shined the right boots.
But it did teach me a lesson that when you're debating with someone, you have to predefine the definitions of words before you begin, which is what we see happening in our culture. They're changing the definition of words. And if you have your own definition, we can't get into a debate. You almost have to start off with how are you defining these terms before we begin, because that's what's happening. We're redefining, and then that changes the argument completely.
No, that's very true. I mean, Socrates does that in almost every single one of his dialogues. He's like, okay, let's is this what you mean? He asks that question, and then the person defines it. He goes, okay, working with that notion. Doesn't even give his preconception. He goes, okay, let's go with that and see if it plays out in reality. And so that's another really good negotiation tactic, yes. Thank you ecstatically for doing this interview. We have kept you for an hour and 20 minutes. And I know that me and Macy will want to have you back on because you alluded to the fact that you can expand upon the education system. And I think that'll be phenomenal, because even with this idea of an independent Alberta, something we have to think about is, are we going to keep the same school curriculum? I think that is something that should be on the table, especially if you end up redefining a constitution.
We need an entirely different history program.
Exactly. Precisely. And so it'll be great to play with these ideas and what historical education systems have implemented and what they implemented that we shouldn't implement. I think that would be a fantastic conversation. This one in itself has been very dense.
Thank you. I'm excited because I hope eventually I want to do a round table, because you're not the only educator now that has caught my interest in terms of what is a new educational system going to look like, because that's something that hasn't really been talked about that much. And like I've even heard of I think it's like program-based learning, right? And so it's like, oh, so what are, we can get deeper into like what your thoughts are on that in a later segment, because then we can actually start like getting into the nitty gritties of
Right.
what's good for kids, like to, you know, try and not kill their natural curiosity as the school system unfortunately has been.
I'd love to do that. I'd love to do that.
Yay!
Okay.
Awesome. Okay.
Well, thank you.
Thank you. And without further ado, everybody, this has been another episode of At Home with Holmes.
Bye.